Hi guys, this is Mohit from Indian iOS Guru, and this is going to be our second video tutorial on learning to build iOS apps with Swift. So as you can see here, this is a playground file which we have made in our first video, and today's session will be on a very important topic in Swift called optionals. So we'll continue our work with the same playground file, and we'll have a look at this very interesting concept of optionals, which we use when we are not sure if something may or may not have a value. So to understand optionals, we'll take an example of the toInt method of the string type. So let us say, for example, we have an integer stored as a string equal to, let's say, 123. Now let's say let converted int be equal to int as string dot to int. So you can see, first of all, in our output area we have the output saying sum 123. Let's go and inspect the data type of this converted int variable. We'll just option click on this variable, and we can see that the data type is an int question mark. So this question mark depicts that this variable is going to be an optional. That means it may or may not have a value. That means it could either have a value or it could be nil. So this toInt method would return a value only if 123 over here, the string that we are entering, actually does contain numbers. But if we go and replace this with a string of alphabets, you can see that converted int is returning nil, is being set to nil. So this way we can use optionals when we are not sure when either when a variable would have a value or not. What we can't do as part of optionals, let's say let something of type int equal to nil. So you can see that Swift is complaining that, and the error says int does not conform to the protocol nil literal convertible. So to assign a value nil to a variable, it has to be of the optional type. So we can go ahead and put a question mark here, and you can see now there is no problem at all. Not necessarily it has to be int, it can even be a string optional, or it could even be a float optional. So all the basic types in Swift have their optional counterparts which can have nil set to it. So let us look at another example. So let's see what happens if we just declare a variable. Let's say let something of the type string. So what would it be set to? So you can see by default all optional variables start off as nil, and also there is a warning which says immutable value is default initialized and can never be changed. So by default optionals start off as nil, and since we are saying let over here, we will never be able to mutate the value of this variable. So we can never say something equal to hello, and Xcode is complaining. But if we go ahead and change this to a var, everything is fine. So if you notice, we always have this text here called sum, which is being printed out. But even though we are assigning the value hello, the output says sum hello. So we need a way to unwrap this optional value to get the actual data stored in it. So to unwrap, we can use, there are several techniques available, and the first technique that I'm going to show you is using an if condition, where we can say if, let's say, converted int is not equal to nil. And in my if, I can say println the actual number is backslash converted int. Oops, and we have to put a space. And you can see in my println it says the actual number is optional 123. But what I really need is the actual integer value stored in it. So what I will do is go and put an exclamation mark over here. And now you can see it says the actual number is 123. Now if I want, I can go and perform certain calculations or whatever I feel like doing with my optional variable. So let us try to assign this as hello, and you can see our if condition does not get executed because converted int is now a nil, and therefore we have no problem. But if we try to do something like this, let's say println converted int, it says nil, and now if I try to unwrap the nil, you can see that I have this execution was interrupted, reason bad instruction. So you cannot unwrap an optional which has a nil stored in it. So you have to use this if condition to check before you use this unwrap operation. So another technique that we will use for unwrapping optionals is called optional binding. What we do in optional binding is basically we check if an optional has a value, and if it does, we store it in a temporary variable. For example, let's say if, and I will say let. Now I always like to put the alphabet U in front of my temporary variable so that I know that this is the unwrapped variable. So I'll say if let unwrapped converted int is equal to the converted int variable. And now I can simply say println the actual number is. Now I could either say the unwrapped converted int. Actually, let me set this back to 123 and you get this. Or I could say converted int unwrapped. So you can see the output is pretty much the same, but what we are doing here is we are checking if converted int is not nil. We go and unwrap it and save it in this temporary variable called unwrapped converted int, and then we can simply use unwrapped converted int inside our if condition. So the scope of this variable is the visibility of this variable is only within the if condition. Or I could put an else over here and say println converted int is nil. So let me go back and change this to hello. You can see we get the output converted int is nil. So this is the concept of optional binding, and this is the one that developers most often use while unwrapping optionals. So it's always better to have this temporary variable which you can access within your if condition. Another important topic in optionals is the concept of implicitly unwrapped optionals. So sometimes we might know for a fact that an optional will always have a value, and therefore there's no need to check and unwrap the value every time we want to access it. So implicitly unwrapped optionals are declared with an exclamation mark rather than a question mark. So for example, we can say let something of type string Okay, I already have, so I can say let something X of type string. Now you can see I've put an exclamation mark which says implicitly unwrapped is equal to hello. And now if I want to do something like, for example, count elements, I can say something X and I get the output 6. So you can see I did not have to put the exclamation mark over here to unwrap this optional. If you inspect the data type, it says string exclamation mark, which means it is an optional, but it is implicitly unwrapped and we directly have access to the data. So what would happen if this variable was set to nil? And you should have guessed it by now. We have, oops, that's a weird error. Well, basically you can see that we have this bad instruction thrown out by Swift. So implicitly unwrapped optionals should only be used when you are sure, 100% sure for a fact that you are always going to have a value stored in your optional variable. So let's put this back to hello and we shouldn't face any problems. Exclamation, and it says 6. So this was a brief introduction to optionals. As we advance in the course, you will realize that optionals are deeply integrated in Swift and used practically everywhere in Swift. So I hope you've enjoyed this small tutorial on optionals, and see you guys again in our third video. Thank you. The link of the GitHub page for today's source code will be provided in the description, and the link to our website is also mentioned there. So come over to our website and you can have a Q&A session regarding today's video with me. See you on the website. Thank you.